Good morning. It's my privilege to chair the Almond Roundtable. My name is Bill Morecraft. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Ingredients Division at Blue Diamond Growers. And as we kick off, we're going to walk through today a little bit of information about global almond production, consumption. We're going to talk about some acreage numbers, talk a little bit about pricing history just to see where we're at in today's world and where we've been, and talk focus on consumption and some trends in the industry. But before we do that, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves. Ashok.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ashok Krishan from Olam International Singapore. I'm responsible for the nut business globally for Olam, which comprises of cashews, almonds, peanuts, hazels, walnuts, pistachios. And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. I'm the nutty guy, like all the nuts here.
Good morning. My name is Antonio Pon Jr. I am the CEO and president of the Crisolo Frutos Secos, the largest grower organization with 24,000 members in Spain, representing approximately the 25% of the Spanish production. I am also another nutty guy, so I hope we can give you our Spanish vision.
You're getting there. You're getting there. Not yet. You're going to be a nice bald nut.
Warren Cohen, Director of Sales for our global ingredient division for Blue Diamond Growers, and it's an honor to be here today. Thank you.
Well, we're going to start off with what's always very exciting is the eye chart of data, but I want to bring a few things to your attention. We've obtained the projections for each crop from the major growing regions, from California, from Spain, and from Australia, and are projecting what that looks like in terms of both production and ending inventory. And so the subjective estimate for California came out recently at 2.2 billion pounds. Many in our industry in California think that number is pretty close, 2.2, maybe a shade higher than that, but a pretty good number. We would have perhaps had a larger crop, but we've had a very challenging bloom weather. When we add that up, we have Australia at about 87,000 tons, and we have the Spanish crop at about 57,000 tons in projections. If you calculate that out in the math, it looks like our global production next year probably goes up by about 100,000 pounds or a little bit more if California's crop exceeds the 2.2 billion. So in this past year, speaking from the California perspective, the supply rose from 2015 supply of 2.2 billion approximately to 2.5 billion for the 2016 crop. So the 100 million pounds is a relatively modest increase, and we think in the years ahead we'll see a little bit more production. Let me go back. Also looking at a carryout inventory from California of about 440 million this year. We've got 3 months to go to see where that ends up, and so that'll give us a little bit of an idea of what we have for supply, but the total supply not changing tremendously year over year as we look forward. Now, as we go through just a few brief slides and entertain some conversation among the panelists, one of the things that I did want to point out is as I use some of the data, I will refer to California crop data, and we're using that as a proxy for global, and we'll speak a little bit more to the detail in each region. And the reason for that is a bit more than 80% of the almond production in the world is coming from the valleys of California. And so it gives us at least a handle on what's going on without having to know all of the detail. Now I think our panelists are going to be able to really flesh out that picture for us. So let's speak for a moment to California bearing acres. They continue to increase. They've been on a steady increase for many years. I'm picturing here from 2008 to 2017. We've recently got our NAS estimate in California, the National Agricultural Statistical Services estimate, that there will be just about 1 million bearing acres in California. up about 60,000 acres from last year and projected to increase again for the next couple of years beyond that. And what we've experienced in California, as many of you in the industry or working with almonds know, we've had extremely favorable prices for growers through the drought years in California, which ended really essentially 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we had an average rainfall year, and this past year we've had a record rainfall and precipitation year in California, the most we've ever had. So we're blessed with a wonderful, abundant snowpack and adequate water. And we're starting to see, beginning to see some recovery in production. As we turn to Australia, we're also seeing an increase, and I'm going to turn it over to Ashok and ask him to comment a little bit on what he sees in current acres and what the outlook may be for the future.
Thank you, Bill. So, as you can see in this graph, Australia, I think the bearing acreage, or the total acreage is about 35,000 hectares, which roughly translates to about 90,000 acres. And clearly, in 2016, the industry until 2015, 2016 was not really replanting or planting new acres in Australia. But in 2016, given what happened to prices, I think there was a lot of interest. And therefore, in 2016, there was about 5,000 hectares planted. Between 16 and 18, there is another 15,000 hectares, according to the Australian Almond Board, which will be planted between 2016 and 18. And therefore, we expect to have something close to 50,000 hectares, roughly 125,000 acres going into the next few years. So the industry is in a very robust position. The yields this year, while the Almond Board initially estimated that it would be about 87,000 metric tons, is coming in slightly short because we had a delayed harvest. And it was also, we had a little bit of rain event during the harvest, which has obviously impacted yields to some extent. And therefore, I think now the new numbers being called are between 83 and 84,000 tons. We'll have to wait to see as we process the crop, which will probably be over by July, to see whether we will hit that 84 or will it be slightly lower than that. So that's clearly in terms of what Australia is expected to do. And more importantly, with the 50,000 hectares that is likely to be planted, and when it starts maturing by about 2025, the industry expects to have a crop of between 128 to 130,000 tons, which is in billion pounds, in million pound terms, would be something like 350 million pounds. Yeah.
Thank you. And Antonio, we don't have a graphic for Spanish acreage. We were talking a little bit about that, but can you share a little bit of your insight as to Spanish production and what the trends are there?
Thank you. Well, Spain is very interesting because when we compare the number of acres of California, we should put the same graph as California because we have as many acres planting in Spain as California. The only big difference is that our crops are majority non-irrigated. Just keep in mind that approximately 95% are non-irrigated, so our productions are getting always very, very small. No? The big change is what is happening in the last 5-6 years, and what is going to bring a new perspective in the future, probably, as Ashok said, around 20 to 25, about the new production in Spain. In order to give you a clear idea, in the last 5-6 years in Spain, we have planted more than around 30 million trees, which represents approximately 100,000 hectares that are starting to be in production, some of them this year, and it's going to be in the next few ones. So it's going to be easy to see in Spain crops over 100,000 in the very, very near future. It is very important that when we talk about almonds, to give just an idea that what Spain can provide to the world market is the unique perspective about organic almonds. Organic almonds, for us, it's much easier due to the way of production, and this is giving the Spanish farmers an alternative of the consumption. So we expect this year a crop of 57,000, around 60,000 tons, which is going to be around 25% over last year. It's a substantial increase, numbers that provide us an idea that it's probably one of the best crops in the last 10 years.
Thank you. So to set a little context, we've graphed out the Nonpareil Supreme 23-25 pricing as a proxy for industry pricing over a period of years, and the axis is a little bit small, so you're not able to read it. So let me help you by pointing out. As we look at the graph, this period here from 2006 to 2011 is generally what we would talk about is, at that period of time, historically at normal pricing range with Nonpareil mid-count running from somewhere between $2.50 to $3, and it would occasionally jump outside of those bounds, but generally stood in there. From 2012 to 2015, we saw the impact of drought in California, and it's probably important to note that the flatter period of pricing really reflects periods in which California almond supply and global production was growing substantively by 5 and 10% per year. When the prices were spiking between 2011 and 2015, it was not so much that the crops were short, it was that they were the same year over year. And we were really seeing the impact of global demand pulling on basically a static supply through that period of time. We had the big correction in the 2015 crop as prices came down, and we've seen relative stability now for roughly the 12 to 15 months after it bottomed out. It's been, again, in a range and a bit higher than the historical range prior to that. Again, I think reflecting strong demand against global production. And now, as you've heard us speak and go through each of the areas, we anticipate that the global production is going to be increasing, although this coming year it's going to be a modest increase. We think we'll see a little bit more increase and again be in a situation, much as we were between 2006, 2011, with steady increase for a few years. Now, shifting gears, we'll look at just this graph depicts California shipments to major regions around the world, and this is through March. Global shipments increased by 26% out of California, and one of the things that we have been really interested to observe is in each of the major regions, geographic regions, the US, Europe, China, India, and the Middle East, all have increased their consumption through March of this year by 40 to 50 million pounds over the prior year. So all told, the California industry is shipping about 280 million pounds more than it did the prior year. The total supply is up by about 270, and so that increase has been absorbed. So we had an increase at a little more than 10% of supply, and it's been absorbed by shipments and certainly by commitments going through. And I think maybe I would ask for a little commentary from both the perspective of Australia and Spain. What have you seen this year in the balance between your production and your shipments?
Clearly in Australia, like it is in California, there has been a good uptake. The local consumption has actually gone up significantly compared to the previous years. In 2016, it was about 23,000 tons of domestic consumption, and it's probably the highest per capita consumption of almonds in the world today, at about 1 kilogram per capita in Australia. And that's essentially because there are so many new product applications and developments happening on the almond fronts in Australia, and we are seeing it worldwide, be it in Europe or be it in the United States, which is what is leading to good consumption. Obviously, these reasonable price levels are helping in promoting consumption as well. And the other point that we have noted as far as the shipments from California are concerned to all these markets, we are also seeing from the consumer surveys that they are also being consumed. It is not that they're being shipped to stock, they are also being consumed. So there has been a consumption growth to the equivalent level as much as shipments. So some of us would always be confused. Does shipment mean sales, or are the shipments going to inventory? But we are seeing that there is good demand growth as well. There is good consumption growth, and therefore we believe that these are being consumed because of the attractive price levels that almonds has compared to the other competing nuts, be it cashews. We heard about cashew prices. They are almost double that of the almond prices today.
Antonio?
Yes, and in Spain, almost the same. No? Our crops are well sold in domestic market. The new trends on consumption, it's also a similar pattern than Australia and US. The snack consumption is going up for almonds, but it's very, very interesting it's happening in the last couple of years with the almond and milk consumption. Surprisingly for the Spanish consumers, and especially for the European consumers, Spain is becoming one of the biggest almond milk growth in Europe. When we are talking about almond consumption in Europe, sometimes in certain countries they report certain flat consumption as far as the industry, but the new, or let's say the new normal of these low prices is bringing in Europe an alternative for the consumption snacking. And then is again where consumption for organic almonds is giving the Spanish farmers a good opportunity. I just want to point something generic. Before coming to the Congress, I was reading some numbers, and I found something very interesting for our industry. Probably we are today in an industry that if we compare with any business in the world, that we can keep a track record for more than 35 years, where approximately 3.5 yearly consumption or yearly production is well done. So I cannot imagine any internet or car business or wherever who has maintained a sustainable growth of 3.5% for more than 35 years. It's amazing.
And Warren, maybe you can comment on certainly what we see in the U.S. and what you see in the portfolio of products that you're selling around the world.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think first of all, as we return to some stability and more affordable pricing, I think the almond industry is poised to grow in all the regions that are being shown. And when we had higher prices a few years ago during the drought, you saw a lot of major food manufacturers struggle keeping the almonds into the product. So I would venture to say that a lot of industrial users didn't take the almonds out, but what they were doing is adjusting packaging, maybe changing the percentage of almonds in snack nuts or in cereals, or chocolate covered almonds in a box. Maybe there's 25 instead of 35. People were adjusting the packaging. So almonds have remained during the higher price years in a lot of the products in the U.S. and other areas of the world in the ingredient side. Now that we're starting to see more affordable pricing, you're seeing a quick return to previous levels, and of course increasing as well. And in the U.S., you can already see a number of the snack mixes, nut mixes, whether it's in club stores or supermarkets that reduce the percentage of almonds in a lot of different items, and we're adding rice crackers and M&Ms and substitutes, returning very quickly towards putting almonds back in their snack mixes. Ashok mentioned also the competitive tree nut factor, and I would say specifically for cashews, there will be some switching back that will benefit almonds tremendously, I think, in a number of markets. So you see the U.S. returning and increasing the amount and percent of almonds in traditional products. And in addition to that, you see a lot of new products coming on board. I would say almost every major food manufacturer who's aware of the health and nutritional benefits of almonds, recognize consumers like it. It's got a great taste, all the good things we know about almonds. And so there's a lot of new products, a lot of new R&D ventures going forth right now that I think will benefit all our whole industry in all the growing areas. In the U.S., you see almond milk, of course. You also see a lot of nut butters coming on board now. If you look at some of the marketing and Mintel and reports, you can see that that portion of the almond consumption is growing rapidly. You look towards Europe, I think, for our industry, the Almond Board of California and the industry has decided to put more money into promoting snack almonds in Europe. It's really a new area. Almonds obviously are used in baking, but we believe, and the industry believes, the Almond Board of California has done a good job with their research in determining that we think there's a big opportunity to increase almond consumption, almond snacking in Europe. China's a big market, just keeps growing, and I think with the more affordable tree nuts prices, specifically for almonds, you could see that market grow quickly. And we know when almonds, whether it's in China or India, with such large populations, you can see the consumption growing quickly. So I think you see the increases coming on board just now. When we look at a 2.2 billion pound crop, that's the subjective estimate. We need all those almonds. I think, in India, you don't have to explain how to use almonds. We've learned a lot of how to use almonds from India. But I think China and all the other regions with the more affordable prices will result in significant increases in consumption for the coming year. In speaking to customers and folks out there, people say, well, you have a 2.2 or maybe 2.3 billion pound crop. It's such a big crop. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that we really need all the tonnage we can get, in addition to when the almond crops grow in the future as well. So.
Thank you. Well, the graphics are, as we struggle with a few technical difficulties, there we go. Wanted to say it'd be inappropriate not to add a little bit of local flavor in terms of the data that we present. And one of the things that has shown, one of the areas in which we've seen remarkable growth this year has, quite frankly, been U.S. exports to India, and we'll talk a little bit about how that number is actually quite a bit bigger if you include all the global data. But after peaking out at about 125 million meat pounds 3 out of the prior 4 years, it looks like shipments to India finished this crop year coming out of California probably close to 160 million pounds. When we think about the imports from Australia, product that also probably makes its way here where India wasn't the first port of destination, the consumption here is quite a bit larger than what we're seeing from the California numbers, and I wonder if any of the panelists would like to comment on that.
Yeah, I would like, I think India is the largest consuming almond nation in the world after the United States as a single nation. And again, I think looking at the Almond Board and the statistics doesn't show what's being smuggled in from the Middle East and what's being transshipped and resold from other areas. Again, I think the industry has a good program in place to promote the use of almonds. I would say the Almond Board of California and the representative here has done a great job in promoting almonds. You see almonds advertised on TV, and in addition, this is a region that just population-wise is growing, and we can learn a lot about almonds from India rather than us trying to show them how to use it. So.
So as we move into more of the dialogue, just a little bit of a summary. The California bloom weather in February this year was incredibly difficult. As we mentioned earlier, we had record rainfall and precipitation, and so about mid-February is probably the bleakest outlook that we've had. Really concerned at that point about damage to the crop, damage to overall production, and it has been impacted. Clearly one of the reasons why we're not seeing a bigger increase this year over last year. However, when the California subjective estimate came out at 2.2 billion, I think that hits pretty close to the center point of most people's expectations. Could be a little less, or certainly could be a little bit more than that. We see that strong consumption outlook growing, not only from California, but from Australia, and we're seeing the same thing in Europe, and we see almonds continuing to benefit from health and nutrition trends long term. We just strong global pull. And so I think as we transition here into more dialogue, I'll kick off to the group with a question that's been maybe partially responded to, but over the last 5-year span, we saw, again, using nonpareil as a proxy, we saw almond prices peak out above $5. And I'll throw in a U.S. perspective is we actually saw U.S. consumption of almonds decline for the first time in many years when it hit that peak. And that was really the start of that 2015 decline. Would kick over to the panel and just ask for observations on, now that prices have reset and corrected at levels that are certainly more historically in the average mode, we've seen increases in consumption, but any other observations on that long term for almond consumption and pricing?
I would just say, you mentioned nonpareil. It's interesting to look at the shipments for the industry last year. The California almond industry had record shipments in August, September, October, and a lot of that was driven by the return of more affordable pricing and confidence in the market. And I think that's a key factor for any buyer. I feel that there's not really much resistance to any of the price levels. It's just that they want to have confidence that this is a good level, and hopefully we remain and have a stable market going forward. And I think all the signs show to that. But last fall, when we saw those strong shipments, if you look at the detail of it, nonpareil is what drove those shipments very heavily. India took an amazing amount, 2,500 containers in a few months last fall. The Middle East and China, many markets were taking nonpareil. And then I think the other varieties and products followed. And there's no reason to see that won't change going forward. I would say one thing, as far as this crop that's coming, 2.2 billion for the subjective estimate is, the one thing California has been talking about a little bit is originally, not thinking that the nonpareil portion of the crop is there. And maybe the tonnage is being made up with other varieties. Obviously, it's too early to know. But nonpareil drives a lot of the pricing, and we've seen evidence of that going forward. So.
To Bill's point, I just want to add clearly, just to reiterate the number, the crop between last year and 2016 has grown by about 10%. And this year, even if it goes to 2.3 billion pounds, it's going to be 5 to 6% growth. And I think what the almond industry has done consistently over the last 15 years is to be able to grow both supply and demand to ensure. But for that short spike in prices we saw in 2015, which was an aberration, but if you see the entire graph which we presented, it is very clear that almond industry is wanting to grow the business on a more sustainable basis. We're trying to grow production and supply as much as trying to grow. The Almond Board of California does a great job in trying to grow demand as well, demand and consumption. The other interesting thing about almonds, I think, which I would like to leave for this audience, is it's probably one of the most versatile nuts in terms of the applications and the new product developments that are happening. And it has multiple uses compared to the other tree nuts that we are all used to. And therefore, I think going forward on a consumption basis, one would also expect that consumption would be reasonably stable and good and growing when supply also grows. So if you look at the supply over the next few years, again, the Almond Board has come out with a number. I think the growth will be about between 5 and 6% from now to the next 3-4 years, even with the increasing acreage. But clearly, there is enough consumption growth in terms of new product application developments and also in terms of consumption, increasing consumption of almonds as a snacking nut compared to the other nuts.
Yes. I would like also to add another interesting point for the audience. When INC was founded approximately 30 years ago, some people were starting to think where we were going to sell the almonds. And at that moment, somebody was saying, okay, if every Chinese eats 1 almond per day, probably this will be the solution. But today we have even bigger data. India has a nice tradition that we should copy in all the world. Mothers give to each child 5 almonds per day. That's one of the reasons they are so clever. And another interesting point about India, which we don't need to teach them what important is an almond, but what is very interesting is that India is changing the way that they are going to import almonds in the next few months. So almonds are going to be available for much more of the population, which this is going to increase the consumption in India for almonds. And the last thing I wanted to point out is we are in a country where probably is one of the highest diabetic population. And almonds helps. So if mothers are so nice to give their child 5 almonds only because they want to be their child very smart, if they start to realize that they can give also almonds to help them on their diabetic problem, I think 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, that's not a problem in production. So we need all these almonds. So we need to start thinking that these big numbers that we are producing in Australia, Spain, and especially California, are going to be needed for the consumers.
Thank you. Warren, we've talked a lot about the consumption growth in coming out of California this year and how that was made up. We're seeing a very unique pricing relationship between nonpareil and other varieties. I wonder if you could give a little background on what we're seeing driving that.
Yeah, if you look at the pricing, I think this year there's a historical large separation between pollinators and the nonpareil. In some cases, 80, 90 cents. And I think a lot of it is driven also by the timing of the demand for nonpareil and the demand for nonpareil as well. It's obviously, makes up a 38-40% of the crop and is the preferred nut going forward. And so the demand starts there. A lot of demand for pollinizers or pollinators, and there's substitutions as well. But I think nonpareil, the demand for it and the concern about having it available because it's specified in as a product for a lot of ingredient products or nonpareil in-shell, really holds on to that, makes that differential large. The question is if that differential will last this coming year. And we'll just have to see. But I don't think the popularity of nonpareil goes away. The question is, does nonpareil stay where it is, and the other differential where the pollinators come up, or if the nonpareil comes down? We'll see that, and we'll probably get more information on the objective estimate, to see the different varieties and sizes as well how that pans out in the near future.
Well, maybe a follow-on question for both Ashok and Warren is, can you make some observations about the growth in in-shell shipments and roughly the percentage of in-shell shipments coming out of Australia and the U.S. respectively?
So I think Australia comes in as a good filler as far as India is concerned, because most shipments of in-shells from California are done and dusted mostly by March, and then Australia comes in at a right time between April to September, October, before the next new crop from California comes in. And therefore, one is seeing that clearly there is good demand for in-shells coming into India. Now even China is consuming some Australian almonds in an in-shell. And we are seeing that clearly for Australia, India and China will be big markets as far as in-shell shipments are concerned. Yes, the concern is the Indian market is very much focused on nonpareils and probably not on the pollinators. I'm still trying to figure out why, and why are pollinators not being preferred in India. I think it's been traditional, but if we can try and improve consumption of the pollinators as well, the caramels and the cal types, clearly I think it would do the industry very well to also narrow the differentials that we are currently seeing between nonpareils and the pollinators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say if you look at the almond board numbers, the shipment numbers, and you compare the in-shell shipments this year to date, or especially let's say from September to December compared to the same time last year, massive increase in in-shell shipments. And again, that's primarily in a few countries in the Middle East, but primarily India and China. And as far as the other varieties go, a lot of people are learning about independence. It's new. It's probably a year or two out. I think the industry's trying to figure out where to price it, how it's accepted in the market. What I've heard is, people like it. They like the yield. They like the sizes, and it seems like it's being viewed as being priced between a Monterey in-shell and a nonpareil in-shell. And I think the industry is just starting to figure out how to market it, how to price it, to be honest. And but it's one variety that is expected to grow substantially in the coming years in California. I think that would be in addition to nonpareil, because I think anybody who's selling nonpareil in-shell knows that each year, no matter who it is, you run out from California when you get to the late spring and summer, and there's still plenty of demand left. It's also the one tree nut, the one item that's in high demand right in the end of August, September, and folks get premiums for early shipments. Depends on when Diwali is sometimes. This year Diwali is very early. California will probably struggle if we have a little bit of a later harvest to take care of that. But at the same time, I believe India will need the nonpareil, and there'll be high demand because the markets will be, I think, empty going forward right after Diwali. So, but yeah, I think independence is probably the next variety. I think people are looking at trying to figure out if they like it and how that fits in their portfolio.
I like to hear my colleagues about the different varieties and how is the trend in consumption of nonpareils and other pollinators. And it's a challenge for our industry. Is when we see how, let's say, other food products like wine or other products are marketed different varieties, focusing on taste and not only on origin, this brings to me the perspective that every day more and more consumers are going to start asking any different variety because the different perceptions or the different uses, but also for the different taste of each variety. This is going to be a good challenge for our industry to try to help consumers to understand what is the different variety, and not only almonds. Almonds can be nonpareil, can be independence, but also can be the Mediterranean taste from the Spanish almonds. So this is going to bring a new challenges for all of us.
And I wonder, can you give us a little insight, Ashok, on Australia varieties? Is there anything new as the production grows, or is it a similar mix, and what might that look like?
So I think Australia traditionally has followed 50% non-pareils, 33% caramels and price. So that was all the planting that happened until 2010, 2011. But now with the new plantings which have happened, I think the Australian industry is also experimenting, and now more and more wood colony and Monterey's are being planted. I think some independents are also being tried out. But Australia has very stringent laws in terms of getting new varieties, and it takes a few years before you can introduce a new variety. But I think now the nurseries are all getting on to it, and most people are getting out of or reducing non-pareils and increasing wood colony or Monterey's, which are more disease resistant and which are also better yielding varieties. Again, in the caramel variety, we have the crazy top problem, and therefore that also is now the industry is trying to figure out how we can get better varieties which are more, reasonably stable yielding varieties, and then therefore the industry is looking at all these. There are some independents also being planted now.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience, and it speaks a little bit, you had mentioned earlier the versatility of almonds, and the question is, and I'd like to address it to each of the panelists. Warren, you were singled out here, but I'd like to hear from each of you. Your observations on the percentage of almond use as a snack nut versus as a food ingredient, and probably a little bit of local flavor for each of the participants. So would love to hear a little commentary from each of you.
Sure. As far as the percentage of the total usage, I've seen some numbers where, informal surveys of where the product is going, and, somewhere between 40% for snack nuts. And, that could just be a plain almond, or it could be, almonds in Germany, Studentenfutter, or mixed nuts in other areas. So it's definitely a substantial part of the pie. And again, with the higher cashew prices this year, that's why I think it's a big opportunity for almonds, to make their way into that category. Maybe it'll grow a little bit. But there's so many other things going on, in the blanch and the manufacture, value-added areas, almond milk and almond butters and breakfast bars and cereals and chocolates. It's an exciting time right now as far as when you have affordability and stable pricing, as we all hope and everybody wants, and there's confidence in the market. I think there's some good opportunities to see some growth in all areas, not just snack nuts, but in all areas as well.
That's precisely the point, Warren. I think almond is the only nut which is almost a 50-50 in terms of ingredient application versus snacking nut. You can take 40, 45, probably going up to 50 with now prices being very attractive. One would expect that this year it will probably be a 50-50 mix. And that demonstrates that it is so versatile. Whereas if you look at any other nut, for example, hazelnuts, probably 80-85% goes into confectionery. Cashews, even today, about 70-75% goes into snacking. Whereas almonds has got a very good mix between use as an ingredient as well as a snacking nut. And that's what makes it so versatile.
We've seen in the U.S. The emergence of at least one category that really didn't exist a decade ago to any material amount. And, working with the Almond Board and Almond Board research suggests that between 15 and 19% of U.S. almonds are consumed either into products such as almond milk or non-dairy alternatives and nut butters. And it's a substantial number. Starts getting into the 80, 90, 100 million pound area. And this is a category that's really grown rapidly over the last decade. And so we continue to see almond ingredient usage growing, certainly in the U.S., and we see that to some extent around the world, but it's, again, a very versatile versatile product or versatile ingredient, and it can become what we would call in the U.S. kind of the hero ingredient in terms of health and welfare, or health and wellness for a lot of products. And we saw that really take place in a lot of categories that are maybe a little flatter, ready-to-eat cereals when almonds were quite expensive. Really didn't decrease tremendously their overall usage, and part of that was the health appeal of the almond was really one of the premier attributes in some of the ready-to-eat cereals.
Yeah, if I could add also, I think when ingredient companies are looking to use almonds as a product in their ingredient in their products, you also want to make sure you have stable supply. And we did struggle a little bit. Nobody knew how long the drought would go on. There was sure enough talk about the drought, and it seemed like it would go on forever for a while. This year was a welcome surprise. I mean, I don't think anybody predicted as much rain and the marvelous snowpack we have in the mountains right now. But I think this has also returned a lot of confidence to the long-term supply situation with hopefully predictable and stable prices. And when you have that in the industry, that also helps to contribute for people to look at almonds as a long-term ingredient in their products.
Another question from the audience, and I'll field this one. And the question is, what do you think Third Leaf will add to the 2.2 billion pound subjective estimate for the California crop? And I'll start by backing up a little bit. When we were going through bloom, many that, both in our own organization and other people we talked to, were really struggling to see the crop exceeding hitting 2 to 2.1 billion. That was very common. And it's a little bit different when you're going through your, 15th consecutive day of rain on the 15th of February than it is looking at it now. I've heard from more than one source over the last, probably the last 30 days. I'm surprised by the crop that's on the tree. And so the 2.2, I think, you have a lot of common thinking. Hey, 2.2, 2.3 was kind of the range people were thinking at. In terms of what Third Leaf adds, it becomes really tough to tell. And I think, you have so many factors. When we get the objective estimate and have a chance to look at the data there, we'll have a clearer impact. Until then, the subjective estimate is truly that subjective. What I would say, though, is it does sit in the heart of people's expectations, which would then say, hey, plus or minus 100 million pounds is starting to get the bracket that typically we can get in terms of accuracy. So a little bit more than that estimate, to a little bit less depending on where you go. So, tough to say exactly what Third Leaf will add, but we do expect to see continued growth in that production over the next 3, 4, and 5 years. Another question to the panel. With the timing of the 2017 crop and the harvest, and bearing in mind the topic that has been discussed just a little bit here, the Diwali timing for the upcoming year, what does the panel expect shipments to India to be through March of 18? If we're looking at something this year where we'll finish out the year probably in the 160 million pound range, what do we think that looks like in the coming year, and how might that play out?
I'll start. Well, I think last year, again, we had some amazing shipment numbers last fall to fill up some empty warehouses, and I think with Diwali a little bit early, I think the initial feeling was that California may not have the surge in demand for in-shell, but India is not just Diwali; it's wedding seasons and everyday use. So I think we'll have healthy shipments. It'd be very impressive if we could meet last August, September, October, November shipments. But I think as we go forward, it's a little bit misleading when you compare month to month. It's sometimes better to look at year to date, because every year has its own original characteristics, and we saw that last year. Because we had record shipments 2 years ago in the late spring. In this past year, we had record shipments in the fall. So as we always have a tendency to write reports and talk about month to month compared to this month last year, at the same time, it's also important, I think, to pay attention to year to date, especially as we get into the crop years. And again, if we have a later harvest, because we've had a pretty mild spring and summer, we may have a later harvest where you're not going to have the almonds to fill the pipeline as quickly as you did last year. But that doesn't mean the industry's fallen behind. It'll probably pick up later, a little bit later than it did last year, shipment-wise.
Another question to the panel is, what are the viewpoints of the impact of the GST rate changing in India from to 12% instead of the 5% that was hoped for? And I know there's many viewpoints, so I think just open it up and see if we have anything that we want to respond to that.
I think it's too early. It was just announced yesterday. And I think all tree nuts are now at 12%, and if it's roasted, and then it goes to 18%. And earlier the industry was hoping that it would be at the lower bracket of 5%. But I guess it's too early to see how this will impact and how it's going to be implemented. I think there's no clarity on how, at this point, as we speak now. I don't know whether something new has come up this morning, but I think in terms of implementation, one has to see how it's likely to be implemented. But more importantly, I think there will be a little bit of a turbulence. There will be a little bit of volatility when it's being implemented in the month of July. But I guess, like most businesses and most industries, the dust will settle and the storm will settle, and I think business will go on as usual. I don't think, this is my personal view, I don't think consumption will get impacted over time. Probably initially, yes, there would be some volatility, but given the fact that almonds, and once again to reiterate, given the fact that almonds health and wellness benefits and the 5 almonds per day every mother gives, like Antonio said, to the child, I think consumption in India is not going to suffer because of the GST.
I would say, and actually I'm curious, talking to some of our Indian friends as well, but I think the significance of having one sales tax level for the whole country puts the whole country on a level playing field, and maybe that opens up other areas. Almost all the product comes into Nava Shiva now. Maybe you'll start seeing product being shipped to other ports, and this opens up opportunities for new customers or the existing customers in Delhi that have built an infrastructure that could more easily take care of a larger part of the country. So I think the level is sort of a disappointment. Everybody wanted to see, I think, a lower level. But we have lower almond prices from a few years ago, and it seems to balance itself out. And hopefully with one rate through the whole country, that helps consumption long term.
So a little bit of a tough question. It's probably somewhat similar to saying, how do you think the trend in U.S. politics is going to go in the next couple of weeks? Sometimes the best answer is time will tell.
Yeah.
So having at the moment no more questions from the audience, I guess I will give a short wrap up here. Is again, as has been mentioned by the panelists, we're seeing very, very strong consumption trends. We do see that there's going to be growth in production. One scenario that is very likely to play out is you see a flatter pricing trend than we've seen certainly through those drought years. That's not hard to predict. Exactly what that level is obviously tough to tell, but it looks like we're going to be in an era of almonds that are quite affordable for the user, for the buyer, for people to put into products. And currently, with the growth in consumption, there's a very nice balance between the ability to generate profits at the farm as well as continue to grow the product. And that pendulum always swings back and forth. But what we see is we've absorbed a more than 10% increase in supply inside of 9 months this year, coming out of California. And I think you can say that's approximately true for global production as well. Very, very bright future for continued growth in consumption, and the fact that the supply would look to be available is going to give us a nice glide path for the next 3 to 5 years, and we'll continue to be assessing that year over year and see does the rate of plantings change. We look like we're well set for the next several years in terms of a little bit of consistent growth in production. And the almond industry has as Antonio pointed out, over really 30 years demonstrated the ability to continue to absorb that production, finding not only new geographies, but new products, new uses for almonds. And a huge part of that's been driven by the global awareness of the importance of eating whole foods, of eating foods that are natural, and almonds just fits right in the heart of that. So again, it's been a privilege to be here today. Enjoying along with my colleagues, the wonders of India, and look forward to speaking with you afterwards. Thank you.